Welcome to the Wide Lens podcast, where expanding your perspective on recent history is our mission. Listen to untold accounts from overlooked voices and see familiar stories in a whole new light. Ready to dive deeper? Let's begin.
Hey folks, on this episode, we're interviewing none other than Robert Fisch. Robert lives in Manhattan, and on September of 2001, he found himself in the middle of one of America's most defining moments, and that, of course, is the September 11th attacks, and specifically in New York City and the Twin Towers. On that day, Robert had his camera on hand and took many of the photos we recognize from that infamous day. Robert, welcome. It is great to have you on here with us.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Great to have you, Robert. So everybody knows this day. I was actually in the United Kingdom on September 11th, and I was going to get my hair cut, and I was in my little car, and they broke through BBC Radio 2, and they initially said a commuter plane has crashed into one of the Twin Towers. And like a lot of folks that were not in New York City and not experiencing it like you did, I was just thinking, oh, this is a tragic mishap. This is a tragic accident. And then it went back into radio as I was driving to get my hair cut. And then they let the song play for maybe 30, 45 more seconds. And then they broke in again. And they said that a second plane had hit and that it was definitely not an accident. And I remember this day, for me, even though we're looking at 24 years nearly, I remember it like it was yesterday. Like it was, I remember everything like it was yesterday. And Robert, you were there. You took a lot of the photos. And so really thrilled to have you and talk about your experience. But let's start off at the very beginning. Tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, how did you get into photography, what brought you to Manhattan in the first place, why were you there on September 11th? Would love to get a little bit of the backstory. So over to you, Robert.
Okay. Well, I grew up in Queens, and can't speak for everyone in Queens, but for me, when I envisioned being an adult, I wanted to live in Manhattan. Some people wanted to have a house. I wanted to have an apartment just like I lived in Queens, except I wanted a larger apartment, and I wanted it to be on a high floor, and I wanted a view, and that was my adult dream. With respect to photography, I'm not sure what the root interest was for me, but I became interested as a young teen, and I took a photography course in junior high school, or as we would call it, middle school nowadays. And I also took a course in photography in high school. And just a note, I went to high school in Manhattan, even though I was still living in Queens.
And to give us like a geography lesson, Queens is in the north, is that right?
Well, the directions are a little hard for me to put on a map. I mean, Queens, I think, when I think of it in terms of Manhattan, Queens is to the east of Manhattan. But Queens is one of the 5 boroughs of New York City. The others, being Brooklyn, the Bronx, Staten Island, Manhattan, et cetera.
Great.
And so when people refer to the city, they're usually referring to Manhattan.
That's right. So those iconic buildings like the Empire State Building, Times Square, this is all Manhattan.
Correct.
Yeah, Wall Street.
Yes.
Yeah, that's Manhattan. Great. So photography, where did that passion come from, Robert?
Well, I'm really not sure. I mean, I know when I was growing up, this is almost weird that it's part of the story, but I was interested in airplanes because I lived near Kennedy Airport, which was also in Queens. And so we, from where we lived, we got to see, it's at a certain time in the afternoon, all the planes going to land. So I became pretty adept at spotting planes, and I had this wish that I had a good camera and I could take pictures of them. And sometime around, I guess I was in middle school, junior high school, when I did get my first 35 millimeter camera, a rangefinder, and I enjoyed taking pictures of planes. But I started taking pictures of more mundane things, and that's really where my interest lay until, when I graduated high school, I got a real 35 millimeter camera and I mean, an SLR with interchangeable lenses. And I remained interested. And, so.
fantastic. So, Robert, you were in Manhattan. You are still in Manhattan. You love Manhattan. You're a New Yorker. Are you a Mets fan or are you a Yankees fan?
Well, my brother's a Mets fan. I'm not a baseball fan at all. I don't really follow any organized sports. So,
Okay, that's fair. Well, the Yankees, right while we're the Mets and the Yankees are doing great, and so there could be a Subway Series. Is that they represent the AL and the NL, but Aaron Judge is just off the hook, and I think he's around 20 home runs, just a home run or two in front of Cal Raleigh, who is a catcher for my Mariners. So bravo to two great New York teams right now. So let's go back to September 11th, 2001. For me, I was thousands of miles away on the other side of the Atlantic, but as I shared at the beginning, for me, Robert, it is though it was yesterday. How about for you? Does it feel like it's imprinted in your psyche and
oh, you
you
wouldn't believe. You
yeah,
wouldn't believe. I think about it probably every day, if not several times a day. I constantly, when I'm on the internet, I mean, I do other things, but I do have an obsession with 9/11 or a fixation, and I download all the pictures I could find, all the documents I could find, things like that. And I'm very proud. I mean, as much as I wish the event never happened, I am proud of my pictures, and I like to see people commenting on them and discussing them. I mean, I don't like conspiracy theorists, but I'm proud of my pictures. But generally speaking, I am very much. I feel 9/11 very significantly at all times. I would have to say. I mean, every time I cross the avenue where I took the photos, I think about it.
let's go back to that avenue. What were you doing on the morning of September 11th?
Well, I moved into Manhattan to Greenwich Village in 1991. Let me just set that. And I was working at the time. I had a job in Lower Manhattan, in fact, not by the trade centers, but on the other side of Manhattan, but still within the zone. My office was perhaps a 10-minute, 15-minute walk to the World Trade Center if I so desired. But it started as an ordinary day, and I was having breakfast at this coffee shop across the street where I often would have breakfast prior to going to the subway and going to work. So I was sitting there. There were, I guess, a few regulars there, and we heard a noise. And at the time, it didn't sound to me like an airplane, but it was a loud noise. And then we heard some sort of boom or crash. And I thought maybe it was a truck had crashed or something. And the other people who were in the diner, not many at the time, we were all looking at each other like, what was that? Whatever. And
And Robert, sorry for interrupting, but I was just in Manhattan and staying in Brooklyn about a month ago, and it is bustling 24/7. So to hear noises, to hear crashes, that type of thing, pretty normal in New York City.
yeah, I mean, this was a little abnormal. I mean, it's one thing if there's construction going on the corner, then jackhammering is expected. But
Gotcha.
but when you hear a car crash or something, it's or the screech of brakes, it's something not that usual. So
Right.
this sound was unusual, but not enough so that anyone in the diner walked outside to see what was happening. But this diner did have fairly large windows, and I was sitting at the counter, but I had a very clear view of the picture windows. And one thing that was remarkable was we saw that all the pedestrians on the street had pretty much stopped and were looking downtown in the direction of the World Trade Centers. So that caught the attention, amongst those who were in the restaurant, and we were wondering what was that sound. Then we started saying, what's everyone looking at? What's going on? And within about a minute, some guy came into the restaurant and said, with a very distressed look on his face, and he said, the World Trade Center exploded. Thinking, I'm a skeptical New Yorker. What could it possibly be? What could he possibly see? Smoke. I mean, what could it possibly be? So so basically, I said to the people at the restaurant, "I'll be right back. Let me take a look." And I walked out and took a few steps onto Sixth Avenue because I had and I had to be mindful because there still was traffic on the street. But I think I waited for a red light or something. When I got into the middle of the street and I turned downtown and I saw this gash in the tower, I mean, my jaw must have dropped a mile. I didn't know what I was looking at. I saw this huge hole. Now, at the time, I wasn't so much of an expert on the towers as I like to think I am now, but I knew how big they were. They're 208 feet across, and I saw that hole, and I started to think to myself, what could have made a hole that size? I mean, that's not an exploding copy machine. That's not, maybe even if a cafeteria had gas, which I doubt, but if even a gas, nothing. It spanned, like 10 floors. I'm like, what in God? So while I'm thinking this, a voice in my head, and this is also uncharacteristic of me, a voice in my head was like a journalistic impulse was like, get your camera.
Get that camera.
It was absolutely, I mean, I'd never had an experience like that before, but suddenly it's
So
like it interrupted me. Yeah.
backtracking, Robert, you are looking at the gash, and this is the North Tower, is
The
that
North
right?
Tower, yes, that was the
This
tower.
is the North Tower. If we remember, easy to remember, the plane struck much higher than the Southern Tower.
Yes,
And so we only have one terrorist attack at this point.
yes. And at the time, it wasn't clear to me that it was a terrorist attack. But anyway, at that moment, I ran back to my building, which was about, it was kitty corner to the restaurant that I was at. And it was 6th Avenue is the avenue we're talking about in the vicinity of 14th Street. So I went upstairs. I waited for an elevator, went upstairs. And as luck would have it, I had been on vacation the week before in Florida. And so my camera was still sitting where I left it. And it still, if I'm not mistaken, had the zoom lens on it. And I grabbed it, went downstairs, went out onto the street, snapped a few pictures, and within seconds, the second plane hit the South Tower. And I caught a photo of it.
So you had, it was serendipitous, if I can use that word, meaning that the setup, the camera setup was totally ready because you had been to Florida the week prior. You grabbed it, and this is around, is it 9:30 in the morning now? Something like that?
The South Tower was struck at, I believe, 3 minutes after 9. So I must have gotten downstairs at 9, probably, exactly, because I remember it was a fairly short time between when I got downstairs with the camera and the second plane strike.
So, Robert, you're coming downstairs. You've got camera in hand. Are you looking through the viewfinder before the second plane hit the South Tower?
Yes, I took a few shots, just to take a few shots, tried, zoomed in, zoomed out, and and people were around me, everyone was speculating what happened. Was it a plane? And I am thinking, well, yeah, a plane certainly could account for a hole that size, but I was being, maybe too analytical and thinking, but wait a second, the planes that go to, people were saying it was a 747. And I know what a 747 is and how big it is. But 747s don't typically fly over Manhattan because they don't land at LaGuardia Airport, which is typically the traffic that Manhattan gets. So I'm thinking these very mundane, well, it couldn't have been a 740, And anyway, at some point I put my eye to the viewfinder just to, be looking at the towers and get ready for maybe something different is going to happen, or I'll see something, new. And the plane came into the viewfinder. I didn't even really I didn't quite get what it was or where it was going or what was happening. All I knew was something different in the viewfinder. Click. Then I think I pulled the camera down for a moment, and I start to see it looked like somebody was shooting off fireworks. I'm like, what? Wait, why would somebody be? I didn't understand what had happened, and then I very quickly then I saw the fire, this huge fireball, and I caught 2 shots of that, and then I put the camera down, and I was thinking, did that plane just hit the building? Because I didn't actually see it strike the building. In fact, from where the angle we were at, nobody could, because the second plane hit the south face of the South Tower, and I was looking at the towers from the north. So I saw a plane, I saw it disappear, and then I was like, where did that plane go, whatever, expecting to see it fly, whatever. And then the building starts exploding. So it seemed like, well, I think the plane hit people were asking me. I said, I don't know. I think it did. I mean, I didn't want to give wrong information, but it seemed very clear that the plane out of my sight had struck the other side of the building.
So first plane hits,
the north
chaos.
face.
The north,
it's chaos.
exactly. It's chaos. It's confusion. it's bewilderment. You grab the camera, second plane hits the South Tower. Now you're thinking, are you thinking in your mind, this is a coordinated attack and this is not an accident?
Believe it or not, I wasn't. My first thought was that either an air traffic controller had gone insane or something, which is completely ridiculous because no sane pilot would follow directions like that. But my thinking at the time was still kind of sh- shallow in that regard, and I'm thinking a terrorist attack. I think, well, I mean, I thought that that whoever was perpetrating this had just strong armed, some pilots, at the airport and just the plane for whatever reason. It didn't occur to me that these were hijacked flights from nearby airports and full of. I mean, I just really didn't know what was going on. But, obviously it did seem harder to believe it was some sort of accident after the second plane, it hit. And I was just very numb, and there was a very strong, like, disbelief, dreamlike, I mean, it really just affected my consciousness. I mean, not to the point where I wasn't still inquiring or that I didn't want to take further pictures, but just to the point of being confused.
Yeah, and folks that don't know this, the World Trade Center and World Trade Center, is it World Trade Center 1? What's it called now, the new one?
Well, I think that the new building is technically called World Trade Center 1. Sometimes they call it the Freedom Tower. I actually like that
The
title
Freedom Tower,
better.
yeah.
Yeah.
Which is I love it, and I'm sure you know this, Robert, but I love how that new tower is 1,776 feet tall, which of course is a reference to the birth of the United States in 1776. But for folks that don't know, this area of New York is kind of like, surprisingly, almost like on an island by itself. It's very southern Manhattan, is that right?
Yeah,
And
Lower
it's
Manhattan.
it's lower Manhattan, it's business district,
Yes,
it's super alive during the day, super dead at night.
that's correct. Yeah.
And so folks are kind of like always typically seeing these towers from afar. And you were about 2 miles away from the towers, is that right?
Yeah, I subsequently had measured it on Google Earth. I think it's 1.9 miles, and keep in mind I had a 70 to 210 zoom lens, which is how which is why my pictures look much more close up.
Great. So from your perspective, Robert, what was the atmosphere like? How were the people around you? You're 2 miles away, but these are iconic buildings. They're on fire, and you were not expecting this on what was a beautiful
Oh, it was
September
a beautiful.
morning.
Well, I don't remember anyone screaming or anything, at least not that, at this point. But everyone was looking at each other and asking what happened. And as new people sort of joined the crowd, the people who were already there were trying to tell them if apparently two planes hit the building. Nobody at the moment. Nobody that I observed had a cell phone. Nobody had a radio with them. I mean, it was sort of. I mean, had I been home, I could have turned the TV on, but I was outside. There was confusion, but I guess there was a tinge of fear in it, especially when the second plane hit, because then maybe the half-formed ideas people had in their minds became complete when the second plane hit. Because then it was very hard to ignore, very hard to convince yourself that it was simply an accident at this point. And how much worse is it going to get? And it was already pretty bad at this point.
So you are on what floor do you live on, Robert,
Well,
in
I
your
live on the 11th floor of my apartment. However, I don't face the World Trade Center, so I didn't take pictures from there. My
great. So
subsequent pictures were from the roof of my building
okay. So the initial photos that you took were
at
right
street level.
before street level, right before South Towers hit. Explain to us a little bit about those photos. What did they look like? What did you capture?
Well, I captured the view down Sixth Avenue. Some of the shots were more wide or less telephoto than others, and you could see a fair number of people on the street, and you could see the buildings burning. And I got a clear shot of the second plane, and I got two shots of the fireball, and I might have taken a couple of shots after that, just of the burning buildings at different levels of zoom. I mean, I wasn't really sure what I should be taking pictures of. I kind of regret that I didn't take pictures of people because there were some amazing, shots people have of that. But I wasn't thinking like that at the time. I mean, and I also had a limited amount of films.
Hard to share, but one thing that we realized from afar, it took us a while to find out, you guys as New Yorkers knew before, that folks were left in a very desperate situation inside those towers, and they were being asphyxiated, and some of them leapt because it was the only option they really felt that they had. Did you know that that was happening? Were you able to get photos that were clear enough before the towers collapsed that was hinting that it was so dire that some people were resorting to that?
Well, at the time, no. But subsequently, in reviewing my photos, I noticed in one picture, I did actually capture two people falling. It's very, and you have to zoom in really close, and it's not even, you could argue that it's just furniture or something, but it was a photo I took just after the South Tower was hit, and I subsequently found video on the web, not video that I took, but somebody's video, where right after the South Tower is hit, you see two people fall and they're displaced. I mean, when you look at them, it's not one dot together, it's two dots, like 20 feet apart. And my picture, I think, accurately reflects what this video shows. So indeed, I got photos of two people falling. But at the time, it didn't occur. I mean, the only thing that occurred to me was there must be a lot of people trapped, a lot of people killed, and probably, a big rescue must be going on at that moment or starting to go on. But at the time, it didn't occur to me that anyone had actually been jumping.
So you take these initial photos. Help us, Robert. How long? And as I shared at the very beginning, the first plane hit the North Tower higher up. The second plane hit later, lower down,
Correct.
and it was more of a structural impact. And so I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, the South Tower collapsed before the North Tower, even though it was burning a shorter amount of time.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes. The North Tower was hit more squarely, so that the building elements were better able to hold up. The structural load was better redistributed in the North Tower because it was hit squarely, and also because it was hit further up, there was less weight on the damaged area. And I think those are the factors that account for the North Tower lasting longer. The South Tower, as you point out, was hit lower down, but it was also hit at an odd angle. So, think of a table with three legs, for instance. So it was actually worse. It was damaged much worse in a way than the North Tower was. And I believe that's why it collapsed first. Yeah.
So what Robert's hinting at, folks, is that when the first plane hit, it probably damaged lesser levels. And then the second plane that hit, because it was at an angle, was striking through multiple levels, which of course is going to impact the integrity of the building.
Well, I mean, both of them struck multiple levels, but the South Tower was struck at like at an odd angle, so that there was more damage to one side than the other, whereas the damage was more symmetrical in the North Tower. So the North Tower could better resist the structure. When the beam started to weaken, the North Tower could resist that better. And also the fact that there was less weight on being supported on the North Tower because it was higher up. But I mean, all those things I put together later, through reading and educating myself about it.
Absolutely. It's a really well-defined reference point for us, Robert. Thanks. So you're watching the towers burning. In your mind, you are not thinking that these are going to collapse, but they will eventually put the fires out. And this is a huge tragedy. And this is something the city's never going to forget. But these towers are, I don't know, 20, 30 years old at that point. They're
pretty young.
They're young towers. They were built, I believe, by a Japanese architect.
Yeah. Yamasaki.
Very safe. No one assumed these things could ever be taken down. If we go back in time, maybe 10 years or 8 years prior, another terrorist tried to take them down by putting a bomb underneath the towers and blowing it up, and failed at that point. So we're assuming these are going to stay up. You're watching them burn. Take us to the point where things tragically really start to change and the South Tower starts to collapse. What's going through your mind? What photos are you taking? How is the mood changing in the city?
Well, after the second tower was hit, and I took a few pictures, I'm standing there with everyone else looking dumbfounded, and there was nothing. I mean, and I wanted to preserve my film. I didn't want to just keep taking pictures till I ran out. And suddenly it dawned on me. I said to myself, "Okay, I think I have a few minutes before anything else happens." So I went back to the diner, and they had a payphone. I called my office because I wasn't supposed to go to work that day, and I don't even know. Again, my brain was in some different place, and somebody picked up. Yes, a voice I recognized, a coworker, and I said, "I think I'm going to be late today." I just, it's ridiculous, but that's what I said. And he said, "Don't bother coming in. We're evacuating." I said, "Okay, whatever." So then I stood there. I'm like, "Okay, I'm on the street, and the building's still burning, and I don't have to go to work." And then I said to myself, "What am I doing on the street? I live in a 20-story building." So I went back to my building and I went to the roof. And there were already a dozen people up there. And I resumed taking pictures. Nobody up there.
Had you been on that roof before, Robert? Did you know
Once,
that you could
once
get access to it?
well, I mean, we didn't actually have a roof deck at the time, but I knew r all roofs have to. I mean, even if it has an alarm, as an emergency exit, or you have to be able to get out there. So, in my mind, I didn't care if there was still an alarm. I was going out onto that roof. But it turns out the alarm had been turned off, and people were already up there, and I resumed taking pictures, and nobody up there had a cell phone or radio, so there was no additional news per se on what was going on. But, the roof has a spectacular view, and
Did you think to some degree, I know this is gonna sound strange, but when I was in the United Kingdom, everyone was on high alert. Even in I was in Wales, but in England, they were worried about Canary Wharf, which is the
I've been
closest
there.
equivalent in London to the World Trade Center area of Manhattan. And folks were hearing rumors, and they were worried that Canary Wharf was gonna be destroyed. How did you feel being on the top of a 20-story building 2 miles away? Was there any worry of, "Is something gonna hit my area?"
No. I mean, for me at least, I said to myself, "Who's going to bomb, Greenwich Village?" I wasn't worried about my personal safety at that point. However, I was, I sort of found a perch near the railing, where I was, with my camera, and I remember every, I don't know, 30 seconds or so, I would look in the other direction because there was a view of the Empire State Building, and I wondered, is this third plane going to come out of nowhere and strike the Empire State Building? I mean, yeah, I guess I was seriously thinking that, but fortunately that didn't happen. And there were rumors, but it was all just rumors. Nobody had a radio, and eventually we heard, the military jets come into the area, all military jets. But I was on the roof, and as I said, there were about 10 or 15 people up there, including the building super and some neighbors and whatnot. I can't remember everybody, but there was a bunch of people. And I continued taking photos, being mindful of my film, had no inclination that the buildings would collapse. And I think I was actually facing the other way when suddenly one of the people up there, on the woman, screamed, and I quickly turned around, and the South Tower was crumbling. I didn't know what I was seeing, but I hastily took pictures of it, and I have several shots of that. And everyone was just looking at each other and what's happening? I mean, it was the most unbelievable, surreal, and horrific thing you can imagine. And I remember I said something. I think it was to myself, but I think I said it out loud. And I said, and this didn't actually happen in this way, but I said this. I said, whatever the death toll was, it just increased by 10,000. That was my thought immediately. It's like whatever it was, and it was already bad in my mind, it just got that much worse. Because I didn't have any inkling the tower would collapse, and there it had collapsed. I mean, or at least we couldn't see it, because the bulk of the South Tower, was behind, from my viewpoint, World Trade Center 7, which is a 47-story building. So I kind of wondered, well, is it possible that maybe a good part of the Trade Center was still standing and just the top collapsed? I mean, this was before I understood how the structure and various other things. But still, it was pretty clear that, a lot of damage had been done at that point.
What did those photos look like that you captured of the South Tower collapsing?
It's too bad you can't include them when you publish this interview. But I didn't capture, as some photos did, where you see the actual top of the building tilt before it went straight down. I admit that part. I mean, it was like milliseconds. I didn't catch it, but essentially, it was a fairly vertical looking cloud is the best I could describe it. I mean, it almost had a nuclear look to it. I mean, the North Tower had a much more pronounced mushroom cloud appearance, but I knew it wasn't a nuclear bomb. I mean, it was clearly just the building had collapsed. I mean, there's that much concrete, that much glass. I mean, yeah, I guess it would expand a few hundred feet or whatever, but it was just horrific and unbelievable. Just
Robert, you bring up
unbelievable.
a great point. I'm going to commit to getting all of your photographs up, and they'll be in the description. So, folks, if you want to see all these photos that he's describing, look at the description and you'll see a link there so you can see Robert's photos firsthand. How much time passed between the South Tower, Robert, and the North Tower collapsing?
I think it was a half an hour or so, if I'm not mistaken. The South Tower collapsed, I think, just before 10, and it was 10:28 or 10:29 that the North Tower collapsed.
Gotcha. What was the mood like once both of the towers were down in the city? We talked earlier about how the debris cloud didn't get to Greenwich Village, didn't get to you. It was going, did you say towards
I
Brooklyn?
I
Is that right?
I I wanna say it was going toward Brooklyn. I've seen the satellite image you refer to, I just don't have it in front of me, but I remember people in Brooklyn, their backyards that were getting the dust and some pieces of paper, burnt paper and stuff. The same kind of thing that people in Manhattan, had gotten. I mean, Lower Manhattan. Uh,
Right. So how are you doing at this point, Robert? The
well
the towers are down, and I don't know about you, but I've been in some traumatic experiences myself. Nothing, of course, to this degree. I think you're a part of a very small part of the population that has lived through something of this significance. But sometimes we have so much adrenaline going through us. We have so much emotion going through us. We can't really stop and think about ourselves because we are so focused on an event or so focused on something externally or outside of us. When you were able to finally catch your breath and realize what was going on, how are you doing, Robert?
Well, I mean, you're absolutely correct about the adrenaline. I think that's what was powering me, and it also, I mean, in a sense, numbed a little bit of it. I mean, I was just clothed in this sense of, is this happening or whatever. But after the second tower had collapsed, I figured, well, there's nothing else to see at this point, at least not from the roof. So everyone was just looking at each other. Nobody really could even think of anything to say. And so I went back downstairs to my apartment and turned CNN on. I mean, whatever. And while I had that on, at the time, I won't mention the company name, but I was working for a bank, and we had data centers in Lower Manhattan. So I don't remember now whether I'd gotten an email or a phone call. Oh, but actually, no, the first thing I did when I got back down to my apartment was I saw there were some messages on my answering machine, my landline. So I tried to return them. One was from a friend in Florida asking, "Are you okay?" I mean, and I reached him at the first try to call him back. But I tried calling my parents, and I must have tried like, 5 times, 10 times. I just couldn't get through. I mean, the landlines were jammed. And finally, I got through to them. They still were living in Queens at the time where I grew up. And and my father said, "I am so happy to hear your voice," whatever. And I don't remember this, but he subsequently told me that I said I saw the World Trade Center collapse 20 times. I don't remember saying it 20 times, but he said literally I said it 20 times. And anyway, once I got through with the phone calls, I somehow, I think I checked my remote email, and the office, they were saying, "Dial in, we're having an open conference line," whatever, because we had trading systems. I forget when they halted trading in the market at sometime early that morning, but we still had trading floors and other trading sites in Europe and whatnot. So the boss wanted us all to dial in. So I had the TV on. I was dialed into our office, and okay, and that's pretty much how I spent the rest of the afternoon until 5. What is it? 5:20 or so when the World Trade Center 7 collapsed. That's the only one I didn't actually see firsthand.
Not a lot of folks know about that not as iconic building
That's right.
collapsing. It was not hit, of course, by the planes, but it was hit by debris, which destroyed its integrity, and it took a lot longer to collapse, but it did. Give folks a little history on that, because I think that's a little bit of a head scratcher for folks. What happened?
Well, World Trade Center 7 was the last building constructed, and it was constructed a few years later, or I think around 1987 or so. And it was mostly inhabited. And the main tenant, I think, was Goldman Sachs. But also the mayor's, disaster. That's a whole other thing. But it was a nice enough skyscraper, and it was a bit of a mystery to most people that it collapsed because it wasn't struck directly by the aircraft. And there's also not all that much photographic evidence. But from what I could gather, it was hit by quite a bit of burning debris, both from the initial impacts of the Trade Center and from the collapses of the towers, and it was burning all day. I mean, once it had been evacuated early on, and no firefighting attention was being given to it. The main thing was trying to rescue people in the Twin Towers themselves, and so it was burning all day, and there are other factors. There were some diesel fuel tanks in there, that were supposed to power emergency generators, and it's said that they think those were smoldering all day. And I don't know. The bottom line is it collapsed later in the afternoon, taking many people, including myself, aback. But it had a bigger influence on me because I was connected to our systems and on this conference call, and when 7 collapsed, I'm hitting the enter key on my keyboard. It's frozen. Our data center, which was catty corner to World Trade Center 7, well, I don't know if that's too much information. Somebody could figure out where I work. But in any case, our data center was taken out, essentially. And not only that, but there was also I think it was like an AT&T, a switching nexus underneath Trade Center 7. So all sorts of lines and communication of all kinds were taken out at that point. So we lost connection. And so then a whole other emergency started, but it was a work emergency in my case.
Your own company's technical infrastructure was collapsing because of the collapse.
Yes. Yeah. Interestingly, it survived the 2 towers collapsing, but it was 7 that basically screwed us. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Was the sentiment on 7 collapsing? Did folks still think maybe this related to another attack on that building, or were folks pretty clear at that point that this was some residual collapse because of the whole area?
I thought it was just residual collapse because of the whole area, but all the other speculation was really just speculation. There's all these theories. The firemen brought it down, or that there's some other conspiracy theories about it. But I believe it was really just it was a casualty of the whole event, and there was nothing really all that suspicious about it.
I love the idea of Occam's razor, Robert, and that is that, the most simplistic answer is typically the truth. And so I think what probably resonates the most and what makes the most sense, and what I think the vast majority of what people agree with, is that the massive amount of debris that was coming down from those 2 towers destroyed the integrity of that building in such a way that it eventually collapsed. So I think that's historically what everyone agrees to, and I think that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, no, I do as well, but it did collapse, and it actually damaged one of my offices building, one of them with the data center, with our primary data center, and yeah.
So it's getting later in the day. How was it going to sleep that night?
Well, I didn't go to sleep that night. At one point, by around 6 or 7 p.m., my boss says, you have to go down to we had an alternate data center a few hundred feet away, actually, in another building on Wall Street. And my boss said, you're going down there. I'm like, how am I going down there? I'm hearing on the news, there are checkpoints. He's like, they're sending a car. I'm like, who's sending a car? He's like, just go down to your lobby and wait for this car. This is all true. I don't know if I've gone into this story with bits and pieces, but essentially what happened was I went down to my building's lobby, and people, the lobby was crowded because everyone was downstairs, like wanting to be with other human beings and talking to each other and speculating and, wondering what was going on. And in the midst of this, a dust-covered Ford Taurus kind of police car pulls up. A guy in uniform with a gun comes into my lobby, goes to the doorman, and the doorman points to me sitting there. And, my neighbors see me being, escorted out of the building and into this car by this official. I don't know if he was Secret Service, FBI, but, banks, and the Fed, this was very urgent that, we get our funds transfer systems and all that. So I was taken down. We passed through 3 checkpoints or whatever. The officer showed whatever was necessary. And they let me off at a building, by Wall Street. And I was taken up to the sixth floor where they had emergency generators, apparently. And several, maybe 5 or 6 people were up there. And we were connected to our systems, and we were making emergency backup tapes and stuff, because there was some worry that a building nearby might collapse or something. I didn't think that was going to happen, but I ended up being there all night. And as it happened, the internet didn't work. It wasn't working for us. So we were all news starved. We just didn't know what the hell was going on, and it was very frustrating not knowing what was going on. And sometime around, it might have been midnight, there was 1 or 2 people maintenance men and engineers or security people who worked in the building, and they took us down to the cafeteria to see if we could find any food. And the cafeteria was like being in one of these zombie movies. It looked like it had been hastily evacuated, and most everything was locked up. But we managed to get our hands on some potato chips and some I think apples or something. And we didn't have masks or anything, and we had a little snack. And the boss had promised me that a car was going to pick me up in the morning. Oh, and one other thing, we actually did find an old AM radio somewhere, and we were able to get like one news station, from Westchester or something. So we were getting some news. But anyway, the boss had promised me that a car was going to pick me up in the morning and take me home. Keep in mind, from the World Trade Center site to home is about 2 miles. And normally, when I would work, I would take the subway. So I'm waiting for this car. I think he said it was 8 a.m., no car, 9 a.m., no car. And I'm dying because I'd been up all night. I really just wanted to be back in my normal space or whatever. And so at around 10 a.m., I said, "To hell with this! I'm leaving." And I walked out. And when I got downstairs, I realized, I shouldn't have done this because there was dust 4 inches thick on the ground.
So normally, Robert, you wouldn't wait hours to get back to Greenwich Village. You probably would just go, subway's down, it's closed for whatever reason.
I wasn't even thinking that. I just somehow, I just magically thought, I just need to get out of there. I waited long enough. I was frustrated with the boss.
How far away are you from ground zero when you're doing all this work for the company?
A few hundred feet. It technically is ground zero where I was. I wasn't on the pile, but I was maybe 200-300 feet away from the actual.
Did you get a chance while you were doing that work for the company? Did you get a chance to look out the windows? And see anything? I saw some photos you took of the subway sub shop.
The restaurant, yes. If you
one with scaffolding that is showing a lot of debris.
Yes, that was my view when I stepped out of the building that morning. That was September 12th. And those are not 35 millimeter shots. I had bought a few months prior to all this, my first digital camera, a 1 megapixel. It was Panas, I forget what it was. I think it was a Fuji something or other. But yes, my
first one, Robert, was the Canon Elf. I don't know if you remember those.
I remember the name, but I don't remember quite what it looked like. But the thing is, my 35 millimeter camera still had the film from the day before, and I didn't want to risk bringing that anywhere. So that was left at home, and I took this digital camera with me, just not even knowing what I was going to take pictures of. But when I walked out that morning. And, essentially I realized I'm on the street. There are no subways. There are no taxis. The whole area is closed off. There are and so I said, well, I'm just going to have to walk. I was pissed I was annoyed at my boss, because he promised me this car and I just wanted to get out of there. So anyway, so I had that digital camera and I slowly started to walk uptown, up Broadway. And I took a few pictures, as you saw. And I haven't even published all the pictures that I took that day. There's still a number, a handful that I I haven't. I didn't I mean, some people picked up souvenir, burned piece of paper. I saw plenty of paper on the ground. I didn't really touch any of it. Whatever. So, and I
Why
had
didn't you
no.
why didn't you touch it? Why didn't you pick anything up?
Well, I was thinking of it, but then I was thinking, what am I doing? I'm going to take a dusty piece. This is going to be a souvenir, and I kind of regret I didn't because I don't know, whatever. But in any case, I started walking slowly uptown. Nobody stopped me, but there were military, there were
I'm gonna
police.
stop you for a second, Robert.
Sure.
I wanna reverse it back. So you get to
Okay.
this building. What floor are you on? You said you're on the 7th, is that right? 6th, 7th
I
floor,
think
something like that?
the building where I did the work was the sixth floor.
So you're looking out the windows, it's getting dark and whatnot. Do you see the first responders out there working? Do you see
I
what do
think
you what's
if I
going
remember.
on around you?
Well, if I remember correctly, I mean, the windows typically at a Manhattan building are going to be dirty anyway. And from where we were, I mean, we were in the data center area, so there really weren't many windows. But I think the one window that I got some view out of was facing it was facing, I don't know, Fulton Street or something, or Wall Street maybe. I mean, all we could see was, like a busy street that was essentially deserted with maybe one or two policemen or something, very thick dust on the ground. There was no rescue going on right there. There really wasn't much to see. And as I recall, I don't think I took any pictures out that window anyway. In fact, I mean, the reason I didn't take many pictures at all at that point was I said, well, the most amazing pictures are the ones I took on September 11th itself. Now anyone could take pictures of what was down there. I mean, assuming they could get down there. So I didn't take many from the vantage point of when I was doing the work. But as I
Great.
walked home,
Yeah, thanks for
I took
backtracking a
some.
bit. Yeah,
Yeah.
so you're now a bit PO'd because of the boss. The car never got there. She's got a
Yeah.
great reason
I
now
was
why that never
hungry.
happened. You're
Yeah.
hungry. You've been up all night. You wanna be back in your safe space, and you're hoofing it 2 miles to Greenwich.
Yes. And I remember very distinctly I walked past the Woolworth building and the City Hall Park, and the dust started to get lighter. And right around City Hall, if I recall correctly, the dust kind of was gone. But I continued walking, and I remember going through, I think, might have been Chinatown, and the streets were very, very empty because, as I recall, like the police had pretty much, set up checkpoints and things. Not really sure of all the reasoning, but eventually I made it home, and interestingly enough, they had actually mounted an American flag on the marquee of my apartment building, which I thought was nice. I have a picture of it. I'm not sure if I posted it or not, but I think it's in the collection. I forget. No, maybe it's not actually. Well, but I have the picture somewhere.
How were New Yorkers doing September 12th morning of?
It's hard to say because I mean I didn't encounter many people during my walk. I mean I don't think I interacted with anyone. And as I got to my neighborhood, I mean I might have said something to my whoever was the doorman. I don't even remember. I was probably just very I'll talk to you folks later. And I was also, I don't want to say miffed, but I couldn't get a newspaper. Everybody rushed to buy the September 12th newspaper. Everything was, gone. But that's stupid. But I got into my apartment. I think I took a shower. I ate something, and then I turned the TV on and just tried to absorb everything that I had missed. I mean, from a factual basis on the TV. And I also wondered, when am I going to take this film to get developed because all the stores nearby were closed.
Let's talk about that a little bit. So you're now thinking in your mind, I don't know what I have inside
Right.
this camera because this is back, of course, during the time when we have film and
Yes.
we've got to get this 35 millimeter film processed. You're probably a little nervous, like, am I going to hand over this film to a place and
You got it.
I got to get this back. I got to get the negatives too. Talk to me a little bit about that around the urgency in your mind and the process to get your photos developed.
Well, I mean, I certainly wanted to get them developed, and I didn't want to take them to a place I'd never, taken them to. I mean, I was used to taking them. I think it was the local. I think it was it Rite Aid? Well, there was some place where I could get them developed by Kodak. They'd send them away, and you'd get them back the negatives, prints, and a picture CD. I like the picture. This is when I was when they first had them available, they weren't really all that high res, but they were, I liked having them officially like that, digital that you could. And so I waited until that store reopened, and it was certainly a few days later. We didn't get back. They we couldn't get back to our office. I think it was a full week before we could get back to my office. And when we got back there was dust on the ground, but it was a very light coating where we were. We're about as far south as the Trade Center, but instead of being on the west side of the Manhattan Island, we were closer to the East River. We're near the heliport where like when the president lands. That my office was in over there, and they had emergency generators because power had apparently also failed, and fans and whatnot. Because it was still air conditioning season technically, and I think we had most of the sort of we but the problem was because my organization had. Some of the other offices were physically damaged, so we had people from other offices piggyback sharing desks, and it was a big mess. It was a real mess, but I was able to retain my desk, and I was there.
How many days after the attacks did you get your photos back?
Oh, I'm trying to remember. It was probably a week or a week and a half, maybe.
What
Because it
did
took
you
me a while just to find a place to leave them, and then
What did you think when you opened up that package? We can all imagine, we can all
well,
picture
interestingly,
ourselves opening it up and
interestingly
looking
enough,
through them.
I was on the subway, heading to work when I picked them up in the morning, and I was going to work, and I had them, and I don't remember whether I was sitting or standing, but when I saw, and these were just 4x6 prints at the time, so the plane was tiny, but I could clearly see that. I could see the fireball, and I started being like, "Oh my God!" And suddenly I had a crowd around me. Did you take those? Did you take? I was dumbfounded at how good they looked, and horrified that I take these, and then this crowd around me, and somehow I disentangled myself from them, and I went to work, and we were all in crisis mode still because we had to work around the destroyed data center.
They are fantastic photos. Were you surprised, even though you are a talented photographer, were you surprised by the way you captured the moment, the clarity?
Yes, I mean, not to the point where I couldn't believe that I could take good pictures, but the fact that they really just were good pictures. I was amazed, dumbfounded. I mean, it's just a complete sense of unreality, and it's very hard to describe. And I'm looking at them now, and I feel my heart, just
Did you at what point, Robert, or did you think through like, "Hey, I think that people are gonna be served by seeing these," because you were able to capture a very poignant and a very a really horrific time in American history so clearly. Did you think through about, like, how can I get these out to a wider audience?
actually no, not initially, because since I'd never had any pictures published up to that point, I didn't really know how that worked, what the issue with rights and all this was. The other thing was, I didn't want to profit, from a tragedy either. So,
Sure.
so I was trying to balance. A lot of people wanted me to make copies, which I subsequently did. And in recent years, I've used one of those online services, and I have a book that I could print out a whole bunch of photos, and I share with people. And I might try to actually make it for sale in some way online if I can focus enough on it, you know. But at the time I didn't. Other than showing them to people who I knew and things like that, I didn't really look to put them out there. In fact, I don't even think I posted them on Flickr until like maybe 4 years later, which is sort of strange. But I,
What was the general perception for the folks that got to see these photos initially right after the attacks?
right after the attacks, people were amazed. They would look at them, and then they'd look at me. You took these? You took these? They also would disbelieve them, and they wanted copies, and I generally made them, for people, because I liked the idea of sharing them, and I believed, they were of historic value. But as it turns out, subsequently, when pictures started flooding the internet, I realized that, a lot of people, at least as far as like the collapse of things, Plenty of people got photos of it. I mean, at least after the first plane, a lot of people picked up cameras, not cell phone cameras, but cameras in general. But, I just remembered one thing I didn't mention. When the towers collapsed, you could hear that from where I was. And it's a very, very horrible sound, just FYI.
What did it sound like, Robert?
It was a deep roaring sound, like I mean, I don't know if a freight train is an accurate description, but it started soft and then it just got this loud roar and then it faded away. And there was just something very horrible about it. If you look on YouTube, and I could send you a link if you'd like, it's not for anything that I've taken, but there are some videos taken from the West Side Highway, which is about as far north as I am, just from a slightly different angle. And the sound that's recorded on some of that footage is exactly what I heard. It's chilling. I mean, it's quite
absolutely chilling.
Yes.
Thanks.
I just wanted to mention that, but. But I think at one point, not very long after September 11th, a few organizations came up. One of them was Here is New York. That was one of them.
Here is New York.
I think their website is dead now. I don't know what happened, but they eventually published a book with some pictures in it, and they took 3 of my pictures. I didn't get into. Not everyone got into the book, but at the back of the book, everyone's name is mentioned, so my name is in the back of that book.
Well, Robert, what's interesting is I'm on a Mac right now, and if you know anything about Macs, iMessage, the iPhone, whatever, it pops through in the background. So occasionally I'm getting messages popping through, and my daughter just
if you need to, yeah.
No, not at all. No, this is relevant. So. My daughter, she messaged me, Dad, we're related to Julius Caesar. So she's doing this background to the family, and
I'm doing the same thing actually.
Yeah. So she's telling me these things, and I guess I'm having my Caesar moment, I guess, at this moment. But also, Robert, you are a significant part of your family's history, and these photos and your experience is going to be something that will be remembered hundreds of years after your.
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
How would you say, to that degree, has September 11th, your intimate interaction with it and your engagement with it, how has that made an impact on your life?
Well, I mean, in a day-to-day sense, I don't think it's made that great of a difference. But I will say that when I encounter new people, if the subject ever comes up, or I mean, just even remotely, just being like, "Where are you from? How long have you been in New York? Where were you on September 11th?" I sometimes, share I mean, that's how I end up sharing pictures with people, because I don't want to say I force the subject, but I try to gently bring it up, and I just make sure that somebody has not been impacted by anyone dying. Because one time I spoke to someone about it, and it turns out they had a friend who. Yeah, so it was. I felt very bad about that. I don't want to make anyone sad, but anyone who really just isn't familiar with it, I really like sharing the pictures and explaining what I know and whatnot. So,
how about for you? Did you, if you don't mind me asking, did you have any acquaintances or friends that were lost in the attacks?
Fortunately, not. Fortunately not. I'm very happy about. I mean, not happy about that. I'm not gloating about it, but no, I did not have any. I do not know of anyone directly related or etc. So that's However, and I'm not sure if this is material to the topic. I am in the the health registry, the World Trade Center Health Registry, and I did get a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. But I continued working after September 11th until the end of 2013. And when I left work, it had nothing to do with September 11th per se. And and I'm in the compensate the fund or whatever. But it's not. I mean. Unless I get cancer or something, I don't expect to get any, windfall, but they check me every 2 years, my lungs and things like that.
To that degree, Robert, from your perspective, I know that folks were saying that New York and New Yorkers, it was almost like a village at that point, right after the September 11th attacks. People were very communal. Your mayor was Giuliani at the time. Folks really rallied around each other. It really changed the sentiment, the culture, the way people saw and treated each other. In your perspective, how did New York change in the temporary, maybe the month or so surrounding that tragic event, and how has it changed the city to this day?
Well, there was I agree on quite a bit of, nice, good feeling support and in the immediate aftermath. People were on the West Side Highway with signs, you know, you know, t- inviting, inviting for hugs because people were just so emotionally spent. And it was nice that some people made the gesture to do that. And when people were walking home, I've heard stories that, there were people standing outside with bottles of water, and things like that. And helping people. So it was a very nice atmosphere in that sense. And Giuliani, I have to say, I mean, I liked him anyway, but this was before he went nuts. And I think he was a very effective mayor in general. And I think he was quite good being at the helm on September 11th. I mean, I don't think he was quite right in trying to get an extra term out of it before Bloomberg, but whatever. But and then as far as just the city's attitudes in general, I mean, I think it took something away from us. It made it. Yeah, I know this is like a stereotypical phrase. Took away our innocence or something. It changed us in a way that I don't think is so good. But I can't really pin down what exactly that is. I mean, I think it made me more pessimistic about things. It made me more. I don't know. It just made it made me less. It made me a little colder or a little harder, in my attitudes to things in general.
It was definitely a moment of sobriety.
Oh, hell
I
yeah.
mean, we didn't realize there were people out there that hated the United States and hated what we stood for as much as
As much as
they
that, yeah.
did, as much as that. And so I think that I agree with you. There was this simplicity and this naivete. I'm not saying it's right, but I'm saying that most of us got to live in that, and it was a nice life. And so to find out that there were folks out there and that there still are people out there that want to see the US destroyed is very sobering for the average American and average New
Yes.
Yorker to have to accept.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. So, yeah, it was unpleasant, I mean, to the extreme, in many ways. But again, for those weeks and months that followed, it was just very surreal. I mean, I was crazy busy because I actually was one of the people who helped set up a new data center at one point. So I was getting phone calls in the middle of the night. One of the main other from one of the vendors of our disk hardware. He was trapped in Hawaii on island. So I was getting calls in the middle of the night from him, and then having to direct our data center, the surviving data center, to do this, that, and the other thing. And for the next,
Not the worst place to be trapped, Hawaii.
oh,
I tried to convince my wife to move us to Hawaii right when the pandemic started. I said, "We got to go over there," because I'm on the West Coast, and I thought, "Let's get an Airbnb and just ride this thing out." And she's like, "Oh, it's going to be over soon." And she has admitted to me, Robert, that I was right, and we should have moved to Hawaii for a year or two.
I've never been there actually, but
It's
I
great.
can
Hawaii,
imagine
Hawaii is
it being much nicer than
this is
Manhattan.
this is how I describe Hawaii. So you take America and you take paradise, you get them together, they have a little baby. There's Hawaii. So it's like
Okay.
you're like, I'm fully in Hawaii, I'm fully in paradise, but then I can shop at Target at the same time. It's a bit
Yeah.
surreal. It's a bit
Well,
surreal.
except the prices are probably higher, but
They're super high, but it is surreal because Hawaii, Robert, is like this chain of islands that is in absolutely the middle of nowhere.
yeah.
And so you leave SeaTac and you're flying over the Pacific, and I got to just keep going forward because all I got underneath me for hours is water. And then I land in the middle of nowhere and I'm in Hawaii.
Well, you know what ETOPS stands for.
I don't.
ETOPS is the extended travel over water or something. It has to do with, the number of engines a plane is allowed to have to be a certain number of hours away from a diversion airport. Nowadays they're letting all the two-engine planes do that, but for a while that's why they kept 3 and 4 engines, because they wouldn't let the 2 engines fly that far overseas without a backup. But what I was getting at was there's an amusing expression that ETOP stands for engines turn or passengers swim. And your comments about being over the water made me think of that.
It's good. That's really good. I like
But,
that.
but like I said, I was interested in airplanes, and I subsequently flew on the Concorde in 2003.
You're
Before they,
kidding me.
no, I'm not. There are pictures on my Flickr of that as well.
What's the max speed you got up to when you were
Oh,
on
it
on
was like
Concorde?
Mach 2. It was like Mach 2.2, something like that. Or
So for us idiots out there, that's like 1,500 miles an hour, something
yeah,
like that.
we got to London in 3 hours and 21 minutes.
What made you decide to do that? That's a speeding
Oh,
ticket,
well,
Robert.
I wanted to do that, ever since the Concorde started flying. What prompted me at that point was I thought to myself, oh, I could fly at any time. I just never did it. But when they announced they were discontinuing service, remember after 9/11, air travel was greatly affected anyway, and the Concorde was never a moneymaker. I mean, it was basically propped up by the governments that owned, France and England, and there was an accident in the year 2000, I think it was. And so when service finally came back and things were coming back to normal, they announced they were stopping it. And I said to myself, if I don't do this now, I can really be mad
What
at
did that
myself.
what did that ticket cost you? Do you remember how much you paid?
I took it one way. I didn't even want to do it both ways. It was about $5,000.
Good for you, Robert. How many
Yeah.
people can say they got to do something like
Oh,
that?
I mean, it was a lot of money, but I have to say it was well worth it. I mean, I could send you a link to one of the shots, but there's a smile on my face. And my father would always say it was his favorite picture in me.
You remind me of someone. We've got friends who live down at a place called Salmon Beach in Tacoma. I live specifically in Tacoma, and they live next door to a family whose son loves trains. He just loves them. And whenever there's like a new Amtrak line or any new line that's being developed in the Pacific Northwest, he gets on those, and he's the first one to take that inaugural ride. And he was actually on one a couple years ago, and the driver, the conductor, he took a turn way too fast, and he slid that Amtrak off of the train, and he nearly died himself, which was just
Wow.
horrible. But I think that Amtrak's taken good care of him since then.
Well,
Um,
I certainly would hope so. I'm gonna,
we talked a little bit, Robert, about how 9/11 really brought sobriety to the people, but also we saw the best of America in the way folks responded.
we
Do you
did.
remember any stories, or did you see anything where you saw folks being really gracious and generous to people in New York on that day or days around that?
The only thing I remember, and this was probably something that everybody seen because it was covered widely on the news, was that like on the West Side Highway, which is sort of a main thoroughfare, not a commercial thorough, but a way that a lot of people drive. People were holding up banners thanking the rescuers and things like that. I mean, who were actually physically on the pile. With bucket brigade. The ones who really were most affected by the dust and things like that. So there was a lot of goodwill shown toward them, and I remember that. But as far as like anything individual or not really.
If you could go back in time 24 years, you have to be in Manhattan still. What would you do differently if you were in that experience? You know it's coming. It's September 10th. You're not allowed to say it to anybody, but September 11th is coming, and you can plan out your day.
I would
for
have made sure
September.
I had more film, number one.
Yeah.
Maybe I would have, if depending on how much time I had on the 10th, I would have gotten some primitive video of VCR, in addition to my still camera. Maybe I would have bought a dust mask or two to prepare for the days ahead, because I didn't have any sort of mask. And in a way, it was almost like COVID. Everyone was wearing, masks. In fact, I remember, I think a day or two after September 11th, I was on the, I was, we weren't back in the office yet. I was on the street, and I bumped into a neighbor, and we were, talking, and I mentioned to him, oh, I took pictures. I don't have them back yet, blah, blah, blah. And then we saw some people on the street, two just average looking people that didn't look like they were doing much. And they had, face masks on, dust masks. And I remember my neighbor looking at them with displeasure, and he said, disaster chic. like they were dressing that way just to virtue signal or something. And yeah, he had a point, actually. I don't know the relevance of that, but it just came to my mind. Yeah, disaster chic. So,
In, in your mind, Robert, are there ways that you try to stay connected in a way of honoring that moment to this day? Do you stay connected with the 9/11 community in some capacity? Do you do anything unique or special on that day to commemorate those that we lost?
well, yes and no. I mean, typically on the anniversaries of September 11th, if I've been home, I've taken pictures on September 11th, and in many cases from my roof, trying to get pictures at the same time. In fact, you could see on my Flickr photo stream, I have pictures from September 11th, 2002. I actually took the day off of work purposely to do this, and there were some before and after shots where you could see the clock in one of my photos taken at exactly the same time 1 year later. And subsequent to that, I take pictures when they show the tribute in light. You could probably see that spanning over several years in my photos. And I have a World Trade Center T-shirt, which I wear on September 11th, for whatever reason. The only thing I've done sort of well, typically, I would print out a few extra copies of my photo book, and I would go to the local firehouse, and I would just hand them to people. Anyone I saw in a fire uniform or whatever, I would here have a book, just because I sort of want to share. I don't, not charging them anything. It's costing me money to print these, but I did just because I want to. I respect the uniform services and especially 9/11. We lost I think it was something like 350 firefighters, 100 pieces of equipment, and I forget 20 Port Authority cops. I think 50 New York policemen. We were really hit very badly, and people don't even realize it wasn't just the Twin Towers and World Trade Center 7, World Trade Center 2, 3, 4, 5. There were like 7 buildings destroyed.
That's
Not
right.
everybody understands that. Yeah.
Some of those were, of course, taken down by us because they were so destroyed we couldn't
Oh,
repair them.
only one I think was that was the Bankers Trust or the Deutsche Bank building, which I had a job interview in many years ago. That was sort of across the way. But World Trade Center 3, 3, 4, and 5. 3 was the hotel, the Marriott or the Vista, I forget what it was called, and there were 4 low-rise buildings that sort of encased the World Trade Center, the Plaza area, 6, 5, and 4, and they were destroyed by the collapses and the fires.
Okay, so they actually fell on their own. That was something that we didn't have to take down.
Well, we tore them down, but they were essentially destroyed by the towers.
Right.
Down. Yeah.
Right.
But the Bankers Trust building had been heavily damaged, as had actually the World Financial Center, but they were subsequently repaired. But Bankers Trust was torn down. They said it had gotten all mold, with whatever, and it was taken down.
What other photos have you taken, Robert, that you're just really proud of? These photos, and everyone who's listening really needs to click on that Flickr link in the description and see them because they're so powerful, and there's just they just, what's the saying? A picture's worth 1,000 words. We got 10,000 words in these photos.
Yeah.
What other things have you taken photos of that you're really proud of, Robert?
Well, that's a good question. I like taking pictures, but I can't really think of anything specific. I have a lot of pictures that are, of sunsets, of architecture, of some travel pictures and whatnot, but I can't think of anything really seminal, as it were. I have an old picture of Quentin Crisp. I don't have all that many what I would call, that kind of historic sort of pictures.
Well, in regards to these photos then, what do you hope that people take away from what you captured on September 11th?
Well, I hope it makes something that to many people who aren't in New York, something that to them is an abstract event. They don't know the scope of it. They don't know exactly what happened. And Lord knows, I meet a lot of people who really have no, who were born either afterwards or even just who are not from New York, who just don't understand what happened that day. Now, these are not one building, it was 2 buildings. These were not just a skyscraper. These were 110. They don't get the scope of it. But it was, because it was huge. I mean, the complex was huge, each tower was huge, and the whole event was huge, for the country, and in a purely physical sense of the scope of damage. I mean, the Trade Center, the area was 16 acres. I mean, that's pretty big, especially in New York.
Yeah, I'd encourage anyone that visits New York or plans to visit New York to go visit the memorial. They've taken the original footprints of those two towers and turned them into these fountains that are just breathtaking, and they have the names of everyone who perished that day ringed around them. It's a real sobering and thoughtful way to reflect on what we lost that day and also what the U.S. really stands for.
And there's also a museum that opened in 2014, which has a lot of educational and good stuff in it as well.
In Tacoma, we've lost firefighters, as you do, in our own ways of just doing their jobs. And on Ruston Way, which is a beautiful walkway along the Puget Sound, there actually is a piece of the World Trade Center that we have, and a reflection on that, and a reflection from the perspective of firefighters. When I walk past that with my dog, and every time I look at it, I give it a touch and remember what we lost that day and how it really changed the country forever.
That's right, and in fact, a lot of the memorials around the United States and beyond have some debris and whatnot from the World Trade Center. I actually discovered quite by accident. I saw a picture of it's from the Royal Imperial War Museum in Duxford, England, or something, and they had a big piece of steel from the Trade Center, and next to it, you could see on a little podium there was a photo, and I'm like, and I had to zoom in on it. It's one of my photos, and my name is on the side of it. I was like, oh my God!
Just by happen chance, you saw it, and you're like, goodness, I'm a part of this exhibit. That's amazing.
Yeah. That's right. So I could send you a link to that if you want, but I found it somewhere. But yeah, I felt very proud. I mean, because I do once now that my pictures are out there, I don't have a copyright notice on all of them. I mean, some of them recently I've been putting it on, and people take them, and usually if I see it there in different places, I usually just comment, could you just please credit me? I am the photographer. I'm not looking for any money or anything. And people have often asked me for permission to use them in various projects. And I say, yes, I don't want to charge anyone. All I really want is to see whatever they do, see it completed, have a copy of it if possible. That's all.
And then just be referenced, which I think is more than fair enough.
That's really all I care about in that sense. I like being recognized for them, but in retrospect, if the whole event didn't happen, so much the better.
Agreed. Well, Robert, it's been an absolute pleasure to get your candid perspective and your testimony and your story of what it was like to capture that day and be a part of that. And I want to thank you for your generosity and your kindness and your openness to share your story with us and be so kind to do that. So, Robert, thank you for joining us, and it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you very much for having me and asking me to do this. This is actually my first real interview about that day.
Well, this will possibly be the start of an avalanche of many more to come, because your story's really powerful. And folks, look at those images. They're going to resonate with you. You captured them really well, even though I completely agree with you, Robert, a moment in our history I wish never happened, but it did. And the way you responded was excellent.
Well, thank you.
Thanks, Robert.
Okay, thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
That's a wrap on the Wide Lens podcast. If today's episode broadened your view of history, please follow, rate, and review us. It makes a real difference. A heartfelt thanks to our guests for their story and to Sergei Shadrin for providing the music. Know someone who's witnessed a pivotal moment? Drop us a line at ideas@widelenspodcast.com. Their story could be next. Until next time, keep looking at history through the wide lens.